This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to our New York Giants Thursday evening Zoom session. Tonight we have a great guest in Scott Pitoniak. I just want to go over some new business, but first I'd like to thank all the new members who came aboard today, and a special mention to the Antonelli clan who joined us tonight. Gail, you guys are Giants royalty. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Couple of things. The schedule I sent out, there is one addendum on it. Kurt Smith, who is another person from Rochester. Thumbs up, Jim. He decided that he wanted to do a really thorough job on the announcers. And instead of cramming all of the Giant announcers into one session, he's going to do the New York announcers in one session and the San Francisco announcers in another session, along with, you know, all the other great announcers of their day. So, and that also will be in April. That will be on a Wednesday. And I also scheduled that at 8 o'clock because the Giants are playing the Padres and the game will probably run late and there'll be disinterest, not disinterest, just watching the game while he's talking, which is not the nicest thing.
If they
Brings me
play,
also to the
They are playing.
tonight, you know, the lockout ended. There might be Giant signings, so please try to talk about it after Scott is done with his presentation and not to interrupt him. What else could I tell you? These buttons came in today. They're really cool buttons I had made up. If anybody wants one, I don't mind sending it to you, but I cannot play post office. Please send me a self-stamped envelope, self-addressed envelope with 2 stamps on it. And I went to the post office and got it weighed. So if you send that to me, I'll stick it in. It's one button per the envelope, okay? And that'll do it. We're good to go. It is my pleasure to introduce Scott Pitoniak. Scott is a well-renowned sports writer who won countless awards in upstate New York and Rochester. And he wrote the definitive biography on Johnny Antonelli. Scott, welcome to our society. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us. Give it up for Scott.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thanks everybody for showing up. And a special hello to Gail and the clan. Good to see you guys here tonight. I think it's a great day that we've got the lockout and all that silliness done, and we can finally have pitchers and catchers report and get out of the game. So that was good news to finally hear that the billionaires and multimillionaires have ironed things out, at least for this season or whatever. So that was great news today. And I come here tonight, and I only wish that my friend Johnny Antonelli was here because such a masterful storyteller, and we had a pretty good routine going there where I essentially just had to set him up, and John would go with him. But he was just a wonderful storyteller. So I'm going to try to do my best to pinch hit and fill those huge shoes of my great friend. You all know the story of Johnny's accomplishments as a baseball player. He was as good as any pitcher there in the 1950s, and nobody did for the New York Giants, particularly in that 1954 season. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of some of the stories behind the stories of that dream season for him and the Giants, and some of the players that he played against and with, including the great Willie Mays. But I wanted to maybe kind of first start out and talk to you a little bit about Johnny Antonelli, the person. And the person I got to know, I was privileged to know, that was a guy who was extremely humble, was incredibly kind and generous, and just had a great zest for life. He had a great sense of humor, often a self-deprecating sense of humor, which came about when we were talking about baseball and some of the good and bad things that happened to him along the way. He had things in great perspective. We had an opportunity to do a lot of book signings and talks together. We went to ballparks together. Gail and the grandkids, it was like a rite of summer for us to go to Frontier Field, our AAA ballpark here in Rochester, New York. And I loved it because, like, number one, Johnny was in his element. It was great to see people come up to him in those settings. And Johnny always had to have his bags of peanuts. He was insistent upon that whenever we went to the ballpark. So everybody, we'd have 7 people there, my wife, Gail, the grandkids, you name it. Everybody had to have a bag of peanuts because that was just a Johnny Antonelli tradition that went back to when he would go to games with his father, Gus, and at the old Red Wings Stadium at 500 Norton Street. So it was always tremendous fun, and I loved it because it's, I always get box seats behind home plate and stuff, and I would pick his brain about pitchers, what they're throwing, and it would lead to one story after another. And we did. I'll never forget, and this is an example of John's generosity. And if he was here tonight, if we were all in person, he would definitely do this. But we were talking. Giving a talk one time, there had to be 150 people at this auditorium at the Central Library here in Rochester. And so, I'm doing my Q&A with John, our little conversation up front there on the stage. And all of a sudden, John goes and he takes off his 1954 World Series championship ring and hands it to somebody in the first row. So, I'm trying to keep a train of thought going here, but I'm also thinking oh my God, I don't want somebody here in the 150 when people in this crowd they just go bolting out of the Central Library there, with this tremendous artifact and so forth, and that meant so much to John. But he wanted everybody to have an opportunity to put that ring on, and so it went row to row to row to row, and it got back to John afterwards. But that was who he was. He was all about sharing the joy that he felt about different things in life, and particularly the crowning moment of his extraordinary baseball career. That was John Antonelli. I first got to know him. I don't know exactly when, but I want to say that it was at an Italian restaurant here in Rochester. It's sadly no longer open. But it was kind of a diving place, but had tremendous Italian food, homemade sauce. The grandmother was in there making the sauce still, that type of restaurant. A place called Antonelli's. And what happened was I was a sports columnist for 25 years here for the Gannett Rochester newspapers and USA Today. And so I've always been a history buff. I've always loved doing nostalgic pieces. And so one day I get a call out of the blue from a gentleman by the name of Johnny Rico, who was a personal friend of Johnny Antonelli's. And he goes, we love the fact that you remember the old timers, that you have an affinity for history and so forth. And we wondered if you'd like to join us. We have a monthly luncheon at Antonelli's. And he goes, we jokingly call ourselves the old timers. And he told me some of the other people, he told me Johnny Antonelli, who I knew about. And he told me Carmen Basilio was going to be there. El Servi, who's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, Sammy Urzetta, who won the U.S. Amateur Open, a tremendous golfer from Rochester. We're a great golfing community, obviously, with Walter Hagen and others. And I said, yeah, I'd love to come. So I went there, and I could kick myself now because I wish if I had today's phone with the recorder on, I just would have let it run for the 2 hours that we were there for lunch, because the stories just went back and forth among these guys. There's fabulous stories, and John was the best storyteller of them all. And baseball being my favorite sport, even though I've covered pro football for 37 some odd years in the Buffalo Bills or whatever. But John, I always loved John's stories because even though I was born in 1955, I'm a fan of that golden era of baseball, the 50s and 60s. Forgive me, I'm a Yankees and a Mickey Mantle fan and started following baseball in '61, so you'll have to forgive me. But I'm not an obnoxious Yankee fan. There are a few of us who are not. But I love baseball history. It doesn't matter who. And there was a time, it was around 2004. I did a really big long column on the 50th anniversary of Johnny Antonelli's tremendous season, and then the seed was really planted. Like, wow, there's a book here. I mean, he has just so many great stories. There's so much stuff I couldn't use. I had space limitations and stuff. So eventually, I got around to approaching John about the idea of doing a book, because you played in the golden era of baseball. You played with Willie Mays. You played against Sandy Koufax and Hank Aaron and Roberto Clemente and Warren Spahn and all these guys. And John was like, he's again very humble, like, I don't really have a book, and I go, oh, no, you have great stories to tell. And part of me also wanted to preserve that for all the Rochesterians, all the generations who didn't know John or who only knew him as the tire guy, because he became an incredibly successful entrepreneur in the tire business after he was done with his playing career and so forth. So anyway, I convinced him, and Gail was gracious enough. And so I jokingly called it like Tuesdays with Johnny, because I would go to their home and we'd spend like 2 hours, wouldn't want to go much longer than that. And then they would invariably, invite me to go to Oak Hill Country Club for dinner, or for lunch rather. And so we did this over the course of, 15 weeks or whatever. And it was good. I would go back and transcribe it myself because I wanted to capture John's voice. And so that's kind of how we came up with this book. And it was a lot of fun to do. He is, I've been at this sports writing business now I'm in my 49th year. And he is one of the classiest guys I've ever dealt with in my entire life. And I've dealt with them all. You name a name, and I've interviewed them, and a lot of people leave you wanting a lot more from human beings and stuff. But John was never that way, always humble, gracious, and kind. John's story is really the American dream. His dad was an Italian immigrant, came over to the United States at the age of 14, went and settled in Buffalo with relatives, laid much of the New York Central Railroad tracks throughout the Rochester and Western New York area. Any track you go over, there's a chance that Gus Antonelli was the guy that did it. And Gus Antonelli was a central figure of John's life. He, like many immigrants who assimilated in our culture, he did so through baseball. And not surprisingly, he became a Yankee fan because when he learned to read box scores and so forth, he saw a lot of names that ended in vowels. Crosetti and Lazzari and so forth. So he gravitated to the Yankees and dreamed one day that his son would play for the New York Yankees with the great DiMaggio and others. And as John, took up baseball, he didn't take it up until his freshman year of high school. It was pretty apparent from the start that he was blessed with this, gifted left arm. And as he got better and more dominant during his junior high and high school years and stuff, his dad literally would go down to spring training with a scrapbook of newspaper articles about his son. And it was a simpler time, and you didn't have as many scouts and whatever, and you didn't have sophisticated systems like you have today. And so he would, be in spring training. He would talk to coaches and so forth, and finally got some scouts to come up here and take a look at John, in the summer leagues and stuff, American Legion ball or whatever. And, they saw why Gus Antonelli was bragging. And one of those scouts who was really impressed with John was a guy by the name of, I'm probably going to mispronounce it now, but Paul Kirchhoff, the same scout who discovered Lou Gehrig and signed Whitey Ford and signed Phil Rizzuto, signed a lot of people in the New York City area. And he was very impressed with Johnny, to the point where he shook his hand afterwards and said, when are you graduating? And he said, next year. And he goes, well, keep us in mind because we're going to offer you a contract to play for the New York Yankees. Well, fast forward senior year, John has a dominating year in high school and whatever. And Gus is finally convinced these scouts to come around and take an even closer look at his son. And Gus, being a great promoter and really a guy who also became technically John's first agent, he arranged for an exhibition game here where he would have his son pitch against a bunch of industrial league semi-pro all-stars, guys in their 20s, early 30s, really good ball players. They have really good industrial municipal leagues here. Some guys had played some minor league ball. They were that good. And here's Johnny, he's 18 years old. So they rented Red Wings Stadium. Nearly 8,000 people showed up, including probably about a dozen scouts. And if you think about it, I mean, this was a tremendously bold move. And there was an awful lot at risk, because if John goes out there and stinks up the joint, that's done. You know, nobody's going to sign you, or they're going to sign you to some D-League contract. But as it turned out, you got this crowd there. John was fearful he was going to be a little bit rusty, because his high school season had ended 2 weeks before. He hadn't picked up a baseball. But he goes out there and zips right through the first 3 innings. You know, no hits, just mows them down. And the scouts go up to Gus Antonelli and said, "Mr. Antonelli, we want to see 3 more innings out of your kid." So Johnny goes back out there, 3 more innings, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And they come back to Gus and they say, "Mr. Antonelli, you know, we pay people to pitch 9 innings in the big leagues. So we want your son to pitch 9 innings." John goes back out there, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He wound up pitching a no-hitter, striking out 17 batters, drove in a couple of runs. And the next day, Gus Antonelli invited, and he had staggered it, he invited each of the scouts, each of the representatives of the major league teams to come and make their bidding for his boy. You know, he was going to become one of the first bonus babies. So, you know, guys come through, several have made their offers, and then the Yankees representative comes through. And Gus is hoping, "Oh, please, you know, make this offer so that Johnny can sign with my team, the Yankees." And so the Yankees come in and they make this offer of around $30,000, which is about 10,000 to 15,000 below what the other clubs have offered so far. And Gus was very shrewd. And he goes like, "That's awfully low. Like, other teams are much higher than you are." And so, "Mr. Antonelli, what you need to understand is that your son is going to be getting a bonus every year, World Series checks every year, if he plays for the Yankees." Well, Gus wasn't buying it. He just figured, they're lowballing me, and we're not going there, so we'll listen to the other offers. One of them came from the Boston Red Sox. Specs DeForcer was a scout for the Red Sox, and he was a Red Wing hero with some great Rochester Red Wings teams back in the 30s. He was one of the all-time greats here. And so Gus remembers going to games and seeing him play and so forth. So they made an offer of around $50,000, and you know, and Gus was very interested. But then the Boston Braves came in. Sam Perini was the owner. He was an Italian immigrant too. He spoke Italian. So he comes there, and Mrs. Antonelli, meanwhile, is making up all this great Italian food for all these, you know, representatives of these big league clubs and stuff. And so, you know, Gus and Sam Perini just hit it off big time. Now, Specs DeForcer, meanwhile, when he left with that offer, he goes, "Mr. Antonelli, if somebody gives you a higher offer, you make sure you call us before you do anything." But Gus and Sam had hit it off so well that they decided, "No, I want to go here. If I'm going to send my kid, my boy out there, 18 years old, into this world of men, I want somebody to take care of him, and I feel comfortable with you know, a fellow paisan here." So he winds up signing with the Boston Braves. Now, many of you remember 1948. This is the year of, you know, Spawn and Sane and 2 days of rain. And the Braves are right smack dab in the middle of the National League pennant race. Now, this is the bonus baby scenario here, is that because they wanted to prevent teams, Major League Baseball wanted to prevent teams like the Yankees, the affluent teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Red Sox from hoarding talent and just stuffing them into minors. They required, if you signed a bonus baby, like I believe at the time it was $10,000, anybody over $10,000, you would have to give him a major league roster spot for either 1 or 2 years, but definitely at least 1 year. He was going to take the spot of an established major league player. So you can imagine the resentment that this caused, because here's Johnny Antonelli, this hot shot, and they're saying, like, this kid's never thrown a ball professionally, and he's getting all this money, and he's got a spot on the 25-man roster here in the middle of a pennant race. Well, neither Spahn nor Sane were very pleased about this, particularly Spahn. In fact, Spahn never forgave Johnny for some reason for getting the money. And it was such a stupid and ludicrous grudge that he held, because if you think about it, if Spahn, if this was reversed, Spahn would have taken the money. So to blame Johnny for, signing this huge contract in the resentful manner in which he was treated, but this was the way that bonus babies were treated, and you had to deal with that. What Sane did was he immediately, got a meeting with Perini, the owner, and said, like, what's going on here? He goes, I don't begrudge the kid getting this money, but you're paying him for games he's going to win for you in the future. You need to pay me for games I'm winning for you right now to win a pennant. He gave Sane a $9,000 raise or whatever. And later Sane said, like, Johnny and Sane were at a alumni meeting convention for the Boston Braves. And he said, Johnny, I never resented you getting that. In fact, you helped us get more money. So anyway, it was not great. The first season, John pitched all 4 innings, threw mostly BP. They thought that with the manager being Billy Southworth, who was another Rochester Red Wings hero that Gus Antonelli had seen, they thought they'd give the kid from Rochester a shot. But he wasn't going to do that. And the first couple of years with the Braves were a struggle for John, to gain acceptance. And it was, again, this is a lot of what you have to go through with the resentment you have to deal with when you are a bonus baby. So we go then to the point after 3 years, John has to go to the military, and he spends 2 years in the military. And he always told me, like, even though John never spent a single day in the minor leagues, this was his minor league training. There were great teams, service teams were stacked. And in fact, one of the teams that he played against, I think John had some incredible record there. He may have lost 2 games and won something like 40 games in the 2 years that he pitched, and they won the Armed Services Championship. But he had success against Willie Mays. And later on, when it would come time for the Giants to make that trade to acquire Johnny Antonelli, he thinks that Willie Mays probably talked to Leo DeRocher and said, I faced this guy on these military teams, and this guy was pretty damn good. So we get to 1953, and here's another interesting quirky thing about Johnny's career is, like, in 1953 the Braves had moved to Milwaukee. So Johnny was part of 2 teams that moved, from Boston to Milwaukee, and from New York, obviously, to San Francisco. Another quirky little thing in his career. But anyway, he's feeling good. He's off to a great start in 53. It looks like it's finally everything's coming together for him. And then he gets mono at the middle of the season, and it really impacts him the rest of the year. And he finishes like with a 12-12 record. But still, he's very enthusiastic going into that 1954 season. Braves got this really outstanding pitching staff, and he thinks he's going to get even more of a chance to show himself now. Well, on February 1st, 1954, the phone rings. John's just gotten back, and it's a sports writer. Sports writer says, hey, John, what do you think about the trade? John's going, what trade? He goes, the trade to the Giants. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, you've been traded to the New York Giants. And John, he's floored. He doesn't know what's going on here. It takes him a while to really digest this. And at first, when he gets off the phone and stuff, he's upset about this, because again, he was kind of, feeling that, hey, we got a chance for the Braves to make it to the World Series with this pitching staff, and I'm going to be a part of it, a big part of it, and, instead of just a bit player. And, but then the more he thought about it, he thought like, well, he goes, I might have a great opportunity here to be the number 1 guy, which he wasn't going to be with the jealousy of Warren Spahn, the jealousy and the ability of Warren Spahn. Spahn was going to make sure that Spahn was number 1, so he goes there, and Leo DeRocher, he meets with Leo DeRocher in New York, and Leo says, like, I'm going to give you the ball every 4 days. I want you to be the guy to depend on. I want you to be the ace. And John's thrilled about that. Well, they go to Phoenix for spring training. First spring training outing for Johnny, he gets shellacked. I think he gets like knocked out like in 3 or 4 innings. Back then in spring training, you pitched longer. You didn't get babied the way these guys do today. So after he gets shellacked, Frank Schellenbach, who was pitching coach for the New York Giants, says to Johnny, goes, "You want to work a little in the bullpen?" And Johnny didn't hesitate at all. "Yeah, let's go." Because I see some things in your delivery we can tweak. But the big thing that Frank Schellenbach did for Johnny was he taught him how to throw a changeup. And that made all the difference in the world. Now he had 3 pitches he could throw with confidence. And that also helped turn everything around for him in 54. And, it starts the regular season, loses his first game. I should backtrack. Obviously, this was not a popular trade, as many of you know. It was a 6-player trade with the 2 most important players being, Johnny and Bobby Thompson. And of course, Bobby Thompson's beloved. He's coming off an outstanding season. He's, 22 homers, 106 ribbies or whatever. And he's obviously beloved for the shot heard around the world. And so New York fans were not pleased about this. New York writers, one writer said that Horace Stoneham, the owner of the Giants, who liked his beverages, his adult beverages, they said he must have been half in the bag when he made this trade, were the words that this writer espoused. So anyway, John, loses the first game. And then the second game, he's moving along and he gets nailed just below the heart with a line drive. I mean, gets the wind knocked out of him. They go and check on him. He's down for a while. They decide to let him continue to pitch. And he winds up picking up his first victory as a Giant. And then he comes back and he picks up his first shutout in the Polo Grounds, the Giants. And he got off to a great start. And before you know it, everybody was loving this trade because this was the ace that the Giants needed that season. We know what happened. He was Sporting News Pitcher of the Year. Had there been a Cy Young Award, he would have easily won it. He was the best pitcher in baseball in 1954 by any measure. Led the National League in shutouts, earned run average, winning percentage, had 21 victories. He was the guy. He was the stopper. He was the ace. So now we get to the World Series, and we all know that they're playing the Cleveland Indians, and the Cleveland Indians have won 111 games. And all the pundits, all the sports writers are saying, this is going to be a laugher. The Indians might even sweep this series. They're so much better than the Giants. But Johnny and his teammates recalled spring training, and they had played the Giants they had played the Indians an inordinate amount of time in Phoenix because they were really the only major league clubs out there. There were only a few, so they played each other all the time, it seemed. And Giants had their way pretty much against the Indians. So they were confident. They weren't feeling like underdogs. No, we can match up with them. And we know what happened. Of course, the Giants swept that series. Now, Johnny pitched the second game. And again, that self-deprecating sense of humor. He goes, "I have a record that can only be tied but never broken." So the first pitch that Johnny throws in a World Series game is to Al Smith of the Indians. And Al Smith swings from his heels, and he's a punch and Judy hitter, and he hits the ball out of the park. And John gets the ball back, and he's going, "Oh my gosh," he goes, "don't tell me it's going to be one of these days." Well, in a way, it was one of these types of days. Like John, I think, stranded something like 13 runners. He didn't have great command of his stuff that day, but he really gutted it out. That would wind up being the only run that he gave up that day, and he even drove in a run on a ground out, and the Giants won 3-1. Then we go to Game 4, and during Game 4, the Giants are up, but then the Indians make a comeback, and they slice like a 9-0 lead, I think, to 9-6. So Elvin Dark, the captain of the Giants, out there, and he noticed, like, they're in Cleveland Stadium, and where the scoreboard was, there was a glare that was coming off that he noticed as a batter was making it tough when it was a left-handed pitcher. So he goes and tells Leo, like, "Hey, you might want to bring Ante," and that was the nickname, that's what they called him. "You might want to bring Ante to finish this off, if you're getting a little nervous or whatever." And so Leo said, are you up for coming in? And John said, yeah, of course, yeah. And he didn't know anything about the glare thing, with the southpaw having this little slight advantage or whatever. And he came in and did the job, picked up the save, and of course closed out the World Series in 4 games. And so much for the pundits who said that the Giants had no chance. So that was the end of a spectacular year. John wound up being on the equivalent of the Today Show, the Dave Caraway's show in New York City. He and Willie were a little, like, rode in convertibles or like a little open parade. And then John had the presence of mind to take that $8,000 World Series bonus and invest in his first, Firestone store. And here's a guy 25 at the top of his game, when a lot of athletes are thinking, I'm going to pitch forever. I'm immortal, I'm invincible. But he had the presence of mind, like, it's not going to go on forever. And so he made that investment, and he worked really hard at it and built it, and it became great. I want to leave time here for questions and stuff, and just want to touch upon a couple of things. Like, John loved Willie Mays. I always said, John, what was your best pitch? He goes, any ball hit in the same area code as Willie Mays, and Willie will track it down. John also had to learn early on, like, how to pitch the Polo Grounds. As you all know, it may have had the quirkiest dimensions of any ballpark in history, and with the short, foul lines and the impossibly deep center field. So he was going to take advantage of Willie Mays' ability to cover, so much ground out there, and let him hit the ball anywhere near Willie, and Willie's going to make the catch and stuff. So he learned early on, I can't let people pull the ball in this ballpark and so forth. But he loved Willie, had a great relationship. And again, I think, he thinks that Willie may have played a role in, a recommendation for Leo to go ahead with this trade to bring him to New York. This guy will help us, win the pennant and get to the World Series and so forth. John talked about the rivalry with the Dodgers. He remembers a game at the Polo Grounds. He's warming up, and back in those days, you remember, they would warm up near home plate at all the major league ballparks and stuff. They had the rubber and stuff there, so they'd be warming up. And he's looking up in the stands, and there's 3 women, Dodgers fans. They're all dressed in black with black veils. And he looks a little bit closer, and one of the women has this doll, this voodoo doll, and she's got this needle. And he looks closer, and he's got a Giants uniform on, and she's poking this needle, and he's going, whoa. And John said he didn't last too many, he only won a couple innings that game and got shelled that day. But it was just kind of what this great rivalry was about. And just one quick Sandy Koufax story, and I'll open up for questions. But simpler time, it's not like today where ball players don't pack their equipment, their uniforms or whatever. God forbid they ever have to do anything like that. Back in those days, you had to pack your own stuff. So the Dodgers are catching the bus from Ebbets Field to go to Polo Grounds to play, and Koufax forgets his glove. Gets the ballpark, he doesn't have his glove, and there's no other lefties that he can borrow a glove from. So he goes to the Giants clubhouse, knocks on the door. The clubby comes to the door, and he goes, look at him. He goes like, yeah, can I help you? And he goes, hi, I was wondering if I could speak to Mr. Antonelli, because he knew that Johnny was a lefty, right? And Johnny always got Sandy Koufax called Mr. Antonelli. And so Johnny goes, and Sandy explains to him, like, I left my glove back, in the other borough here, and could I borrow a glove, Mr. Antonelli? And so John laughed, and he went and he had, had a couple extra gloves, and he came back with one. He goes, just don't put any curses in the glove, kid. You can use it or whatever. But it was a simpler time, obviously, and it was an extremely fun time. But rather, I wanted to leave time for any questions you might have. I mean, I've got many more stories about John. Just a good guy.
Do you want me to get those pictures up for you first?
Sure, if you want to.
If I can do it, I'm going to try. Hold
okay.
on. All right. There we go.
Uh,
All right, there you go.
Okay, yeah, I'll whip through these for you. This is a personal favorite for me. I have it up on here in my office, and every day John's looking down on me and inspiring me. We did a book signing at Frontier Field, the minor league ballpark here, and it worked out. I'm a right-hander, he's a lefty. We threw out the first pitch before the game and stuff like that. And I always joke with John, like, hey, between the two of us, we've got 126 victories and 6 National League All-Star selections and this and that. But it's one of my favorites. Joe Torito, the Red Wings official photographer, took it, and it's one of my all-time favorite pictures from my career. This is a young Johnny. This is when he was pitching for Jefferson High School here in Rochester, New York. I love that hair. I told him, I go, I'm always envious of your hair too. Not only envious for the fact that you played in the big leagues, and I would have given anything to throw one pitch in the big leagues. But man, what a head of hair he had, and he had it all the way through, and he's such a distinguished looking man, But he was a 3-sport athlete in high school. He won the city championship here as a quarterback in high school through a 70-something yard touchdown pass to win the city championship. He played against Walter Dukes in basketball, who was 6'11", and they beat Walter Dukes' team. Walter Dukes later would play in the NBA. He was just a great natural athlete. John wasn't, and he got his athletic talent from his mom, who was great at badminton and also an excellent ballroom dancer. This is John and Sam Perini and John's dad Gus in the middle, and that's John signing his bonus contract there. I mean, look how young this kid is, and he's ready to go and join the big leagues in the middle of a pennant race and stuff. But the next day, they got on after they signed it. Actually, they got on Sam Perini's private plane and flew to Boston, and he was introduced that night. He was in uniform, and it was just an incredible experience for an 18-year-old kid who, just a week or two earlier had just walked across the stage to get his high school diploma. This was from 1954 season. That's when John won his 20th game. And the catcher during that game was a guy by the name of Joe Garagiola. Joe was his catcher for his 20th victory. And Joe, talking to Joe later, he had nothing but great things to say about Johnny when I dropped Johnny's name and stuff like that. And just Johnny was just so well respected throughout the baseball world. And I think you know who that is with Johnny. Again, he loved Willie Mays, and who doesn't? That was a pretty good collaboration there, particularly in 1954. And again, the next several years there and on into San Francisco. They had a Johnny Antonelli Day here in Rochester on November 4th, 54, after we came home from the World Series and all the festivities in New York. And he got the key to the city. It was a tremendous turnout, more than 1,000 people at a banquet. And at his old high school, they had like a huge banner hanging like to the entrance of his high school there, welcoming Johnny home. And he's just, he was always beloved here in his hometown, and he loved living here. He really did. Sport magazine, that's the cover. Like, when I was a kid, before Sports Illustrated really took off, Sport magazine was the magazine, of course, along with the sporting news. And John was on the next year. This was a photo from Ozzie Sweet. Ozzie Sweet was a tremendous portrait photographer. Not only sports, it seemed like he took every sport magazine cover photo, but he also shot for Look and Life and Time magazine. So in addition to shooting, Johnny Antonelli and Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and Casey Stengel, he shot Albert Einstein and Marilyn Monroe. He was a fabulous photographer. And that's the cover of our book. And the story behind this is that we originally wanted to do a Topps card of Johnny Antonelli as the cover of the book. And Johnny had done some signings with Topps. If you remember, they would put in, signed cards in packs. They would, intersperse them. And John actually did some signings for Topps to do that. And when we approached Topps to have permission to use one of John's cards, they told us no. So what I did, RIT was our publisher, RIT Press. And so I said, could you design a cover that make it look like a baseball card? So the front of it is like that, and the back of it is like the writing of a baseball card, including a little cartoon that we used to have on those baseball cards when we were kids that you would see on the back. But we just like that. I just, it was him following through, posed action shots, as we called them, and it was in the Polo Grounds.
Scott, what a great presentation. We can't thank you enough. Before we open up the floor, Gail, do you want to say anything, or you just want to hear people?
Oh, Scott covers everything so beautifully. I'd like to hear some the questions that they've got for Scott. I don't think anyone will have a question for me, but I'll be glad to answer if I can.
All right. Before we get to Harvey, Scott, I got two questions for you. Did he talk to you at all about his time in San Francisco compared to New York?
Yes.
And in 2004, Steve and I were at the 50th anniversary of the World Series championship team, and he was there with his fellow mates, whoever were still alive at the time. Did he comment to you on any of that?
Yeah. First off, San Francisco, I think just as it was the case with Willie, John didn't. He hated to see the team leave New York. Some of it was for selfish reasons. In New York, his family could come and see him. John was a devout family man, and he did not, he didn't like, he didn't carouse on the road. Like he wasn't a drinker, and stuff. And so the travel was hard on him and whatever. And he had come to really enjoy New York, and so it was very, very tough for him when they moved out there, when he had to go play out there and stuff, to leave his family back in Rochester. It meant he wasn't going to see them nearly as often. There was like and he said this even about Willie Mays, like Willie wasn't embraced there necessarily the way he was in New York, it was almost like, he couldn't do enough, and it was kind of shocking when you thought about that. Now, John ran into some trouble there because they played in Seal Stadium, which was a minor league bandbox of a ballpark before Candlestick was made. It was not a pitcher's park, no place. The power alleys were very, very hitter friendly, and so he got himself into trouble by criticizing the ballpark, and with these little pop flies that wound up going to the left field bleachers or whatever, and stuff like that. And some of the writers kind of took it the wrong way. They thought that John was taking shots at San Francisco when he was taking shots at the ballpark, saying this is not a major league ballpark. And so a lot of people kind of turned on him, and he didn't feel that he got kind of the support sometimes from the ownership as a result, like Chuck Feeney and some of the others, like, you need to have my back on this. He goes, I love San Francisco. It has nothing to do with the fans or the people here. It's this ballpark. It's just a rinky dink minor league park, and there was also a writer, John told me the story, there was a writer right off the bat. I think John had he got off to a slow start or whatever. And a writer immediately started saying, like, he's a has-been, washed-up 28-year-old. Well, John didn't take kindly to that, and he kind of let the writer have it. And then so they, what happened was it just got bigger and bigger, and then he eventually apologized and so forth. But but all that said, it's not that he hated San Francisco anyway. He enjoyed San Francisco. But I just think those other reasons, being so far away from home, having really enjoyed it, think about it. New York was the place where he finally fulfilled his potential, after struggling in Boston and so forth. Now, as far as he loved those get-togethers, and Gail can speak to that. Like they went back a couple of times to San Francisco for these events in which they honored their all-time greats and their all-stars and things like that. as far as his, he loved his teammates. You know, for the most part on the Giants. He got along with them tremendously. He was a player rep. He was a voted player rep. And it's one of the interesting twists is he became very, very close to Bobby Thompson, because you remember later on Bobby Thompson comes back to the Giants and they become roommates. And he's had nothing but fun things to say about Bobby. Really, really enjoyed Bobby and enjoyed virtually everybody on the team. And I didn't even get into some of the Leo stories. There's some classic Leo DeRocher stories, but he loved pitching for Leo too.
God, I forgot to also mention the best way to get your book. How could the members in the group?
You can it's available on Amazon, but it's also available through RIT Press. So if you Google, it's the Rochester Institute of Technology, but it's RIT Press. You can get the book there, but it's also available on Amazon, and I think there are some copies signed by John available on Amazon as well.
All right,
so
we're gonna open it up. Scott, once again, fabulous. We're gonna go Harvey, Fred, Mars, and John to start us off, and then the judge, Jim. Harvey,
Scott, that was terrific. I've been lucky enough, or have been lucky enough, to have had a number of conversations, dinners with Bobby Thompson. And on one occasion, I was 8 years old in 1954. And so I was telling Bobby how disappointed I was as a kid that he had been traded. And Bobby cut me off. And he said, with pride, he said, you know, I was traded for a pretty good guy. And then he said, specifically, he said the Giants wouldn't have won the World Series without Johnny Antonelli. And that was a point of pride with Bobby Thompson. You answered my other question, or my question would have been, how did Bobby get along with Johnny when Bobby came back to the Giants? But you answered that. It was terrific.
Thank you. That's a great story. Thanks. Again, I know Johnny had nothing but fond memories of rooming with Bobby, and he loved him, and he loved his accent and everything. Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, Bobby was a genuine guy, and when he made that point about being traded for Johnny, it probably slipped my mind that he had been traded for Johnny Antonelli, but he corrected me. He emphasized, and he straightened me out right away.
thanks, Harvey. Fred, you're up, Fred.
This is Fred's friend, Pete. Scott, great presentation, man. Can you clarify the record that can be tied but never broken? Was that about the first pitch home run, or what was that about? And
yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. It was Al Smith, it's Johnny's the first pitch he's ever delivered in a World Series competition. And Al Smith, and Johnny used to say, he's a punch and Judy hitter. And I want to get off to a good start here. So I don't want to be throwing a ball here on my first pitch. I want to get my nerves calmed down here, let me get into a groove and so forth. And bang, and then, he's getting the ball back, and he did say, I was like, oh no, I hope it isn't going to be one of these days. As I said, it was not a masterpiece. I mean, he goes today they would have taken him out of the game because he probably threw 170 pitches or whatever. There were a number of double plays that bailed him out. And John was not known to be a strikeout pitcher, but I think he had 9 strikeouts in that game. So he was in and out of trouble the entire game or whatever. But yeah, that was what a start. So yeah, it can only be tied. You can only throw that first pitch, and somebody gets a home run against you. You're in the books now with Johnny Antonelli. But that was, and that's the other great thing about Johnny is he always had that self-deprecating sense of humor for as great as he was. And I mean, I get people here that drive me nuts sometimes in Rochester, you don't realize how great a career this guy had. And stuff, and people, sometimes here they take it for granted or whatever, but he would joke about that. Johnny would joke about, I don't know the exact figure, but he goes yeah, and I contributed to Hank Aaron's home run record. I must have given 7, 8, 9 home runs. I served up to him. John also when Stan the Man Musial set the record with 5 home runs in a doubleheader, which is what since been tied by Nate Colbert, and somebody else more recently tied it with 5 homers in a doubleheader.
Don
Johnny
Mueller.
gave-
Don
Johnny
Mueller
gave-
did it for the Giants in 51.
Who did?
Don Mueller.
Yeah,
Did
Yeah,
2 games. It was over 2 games.
yeah,
Don
he
Mueller.
over 2 games of a doubleheader, yes.
But so Johnny said he gave up. I think he gave up 2 of the home runs to Musial that day. So he goes, yeah. So I contributed to that too, whatever. But people. I talked about him being respected, and one of the people who really respected John was Jackie Robinson. And when Jackie Robinson was asked later about like who the toughest pitchers were in his career, Jackie said, I think, was it Ewell Blackwell? Was he like the guy who was
Yeah,
the guy who came sidewinder?
sidewinder.
Yeah, and Johnny Antonelli. And Johnny picked him off a couple of times, but he also paid homage to Jackie Robinson, saying like, he just drove me nuts when he got on base. I mean, he was such a distraction. He goes, it was so hard to focus because he was gonna just jump all around on that base, and you didn't know when he was going to be on second or third or whatever, So, but there was again tremendous respect from that era.
Thanks, Pete. Fred, did you have a question?
Go ahead. Yeah, Fred had a question too, and maybe this ought to be the last thing because it's a change of subject. Scott, Fred would like to hear about the torch bearing for the Winter Olympics, but maybe that'll be last after you've answered some more Giants questions.
Okay, all right.
All right, we got Mars, John, and then Jim. Mars?
Okay, I can attest to Johnny's graciousness. 2017, I was presenting at the Sabre meeting in New York on the 2 Giant Dodger games in Jersey City. And Johnny pitched both games, 56 and 57. And I wanted to get his own impression of those games. So I wrote him a note, and he actually gave me a phone call. And we went through my presentation. He told me that his 1956 game, Giants won it 1-0. Johnny struck out 14 and only gave up 2 hits to the Dodgers. The Giants won it on a Willie Mays home run. In fact, I think that picture of Willie and Johnny might have been actually from that game. And then in 1957, he didn't pitch as well, but Giants also won those games. But Johnny told me that was the best game he ever pitched in the major leagues, was that 1-0 victory in Jersey City in 1956.
Yeah.
He also wanted me to start the meeting off with a trivia question. So I did. Who is the only pitcher to beat the Brooklyn Dodgers in a single season in 3 different ballparks?
Right.
Because
Yep, you're absolutely right. I was going to follow up and say that. Yeah, Johnny always mentions that. I beat them in 3 different ballparks in the same season. Yep, you're absolutely right. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, was that one game against Don Newcomb? That
was both games. Newcomb started both games, and he beat Newcomb 1-0. And I asked Willie Mays once about that home run in Jersey City, and he knew it. Willie knew that it was off of Newcomb.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Thanks, John. Mars, you're up. Mars, take off, unmute Mars. Mars, there you go.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, I got it. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. Now, when in the late 50s, opinions to several people, San Francisco and Boston were some of the perhaps the most provincial cities in America, where everybody seems to know each other. Where in New York City, you may not even know your next door neighbor, with the greater population and the high rises and all that. So when Antonelli being a New York Giant and Willie Mays coming from New York, the provincialism took the stranglehold where the fans were still embracing Joe DiMaggio. And if you cast an aspersion on a San Francisco monument like Seal Stadium, you would be chastised in the press. So when I got here in 1967, my uncle, who was in the steel business, said that people he was doing business with in San Francisco asked him if he was a 49er. And he didn't even know what that meant other than the football team. But when he said, no, he's from the East Coast, he's from New York, they didn't want to do business with him. So when Antonelli made a remark about Seal Stadium and Willie Mays only hit 29 home runs, but was second in the league in batting, he wasn't given any credit. And there was a lot of, even his house was, a window went through the window of his house in Miraloma Park. So, I mean, so the question I have for you, Scott, you mentioned that Willie Mays told Antonelli how to pitch. The Polo Grounds had short foul lines. So if he didn't have perfect location, wouldn't he have given up a lot of home runs there as well?
You mean in Seal Stadium you're talking about?
Well, Seal Stadium you mentioned was like a bandbox.
Right.
But if Antonelli's location wasn't perfect in the Polo Grounds, they could pull it for a pop fly for a home run there too.
Yeah,
So-
but I guess when you look at the Polo Grounds, you could say it was unfair to pitchers down the lines, right?
Yeah,
And then unfair to hitters in the power alleys. You know, much like old Yankee Stadium. I mean, how many home runs did DiMaggio and Mantle lose in Death Valley and so forth? But yet, there's Yogi Berra coming up, a left-handed hitting catcher, and he would get DiMaggio upset because he'd wrap a 297 footer around the foul pole and stuff. Yogi would, and these guys are like hitting 450 foot outs. So yeah, it was. But I think in Seals, I think in what John was thinking about, even if he had pinpoint control, in Seals, and he gets them to hit it to center field, it could still wind up in the seats because there's really not a fair power alley, for pitchers and stuff. It was just such a, I forget off the top of my head what the bandbox dimensions were, but it kind of reminded me a little bit of Wrigley Field in LA where we watched the home run derby,
right.
which had, really, like it was a PCL park, a Pacific Coast League park, like the Hollywood Stars and stuff. And you wonder like why the averages were so high in these home run numbers of Steve Bilko and the others, and Tony Lazzari hitting 60 homers, with the Pacific Coast League. It was because these ballparks were just like pitchers had no chance. But it isn't. It's fascinating to me you would mention that I wouldn't think a criticism of a ballpark, but Seals had, obviously it was part of the San Francisco baseball culture going back to the DiMaggio days and so forth, and so it was a beloved little bandbox to them. And to hell with you, Johnny Antonelli probably was the attitude then, right? You're criticizing the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Marty. Judge, you're up.
Thank you, Gary. So when I was about 7 years old, my father was went to Firestone and came home with a Johnny Antonelli autograph. There you go.
Wow.
And 55 years later, I'm attending San Francisco, New York Giant preservation meetings. But I got a chance to meet Johnny a couple of times. Gail, you probably wouldn't remember it, but I had lunch with you a couple of times over at Oak Hill and breakfast at Charbroil. It's for our friend Jim Ryan. He had set
Yes,
up.
I do remember.
Yeah, so I enjoyed. I just loved getting a chance to meet him and loved talking to him. But one of the things that I recall about our lunches, he loved to talk about his hitting. So Scott, I know he had the record for most home runs by a pitcher for a long time. I think Bumgarner broke it. But anything about his hitting that comes to mind that you'd like to talk about?
Oh yeah, John. In fact, like John, according to Baseball Reference and the Baseball Encyclopedia and everything, like when I was looking at John had told me like, yeah, I hit 17 homers in my career. And so I come back when I'm proofing the book and I said, John, I checked all the sources and it says 15, like every source I checked. And he goes like, well, he goes, let me tell you something. He goes like, pitchers, they don't hit too many homers. He goes, I remember how many I hit. He goes, they must have been, two of them must have been in games that the stats didn't count. Like we get, with the game, rain delayed or whatever, and they didn't make it up or whatever. So no, John took great pride in his hitting and how different the game was then. There were times when like Leo would have John pinch hit, and because he was that good of a hitter. And there was one game I think he had him pinch hit, and they were batting around in the inning, and John was going to come up again. He would have had a chance to if they wanted to hit him again. And Leo didn't do it because he didn't want to embarrass some of the weaker hitting position players on the team, so he had somebody pinch hit for John when they batted around, in that same inning or whatever. But yeah, he took great pride in that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he had the Giants pitching record for home runs until Bumgarner broke it a few years ago and stuff like that. I think John had 4 or 5 was his max in a season. But yeah, he took a lot of pride. And when John started playing baseball, he wanted to be a first baseman. He didn't want to be a pitcher. And his high school coach, they were whipping the ball around the infield, and you just saw like how effortless John was throwing the ball. And goes like, "That's a live arm, and we're going to take advantage of that arm."
Thank you, Judge. Dennis Snelling?
Hi, thanks. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Couple quick things. I wonder, one, if you could talk a little bit about why Tom Sheehan had such a problem with Johnny and so publicly said he's never pitching for the Giants again. And I know Johnny, it looks like, did not go to Japan with the Giants after the 1960 season. And then also, did he ever pitch against Warren Spahn? How did he do?
Yeah, well, I'll do the second one first. Yeah, in fact, it was early in the season in '54. He beat Spahn 4-0. And he also drove in 2 runs or whatever. So, and again, John got along pretty much with everybody, but for some reason Warren, and they were together at all-star games and other functions, through the years and stuff, and old timers functions and whatever. Warren just never would let it go for some reason, and it was just the dumbest thing. And the other thing about that too that's interesting is that John's older brother went to the same Buffalo high school that Warren Spahn did. So he knew the Antonelli family. So it just never made any sense. Like, what did I do to you other than I was an 18-year-old who signed a bonus baby contract? I think that, toward the end there with the Giants, I think it was John felt that Chuck Feeney and some of the other officials of the Giants didn't defend him, didn't have his back, he really took it to heart, and he kind of knew like the end was near in San Francisco as a result of that in '60, and he was going to probably be dealt to another team, and he even said publicly in some stories and stuff like, well, I wouldn't mind going back closer to the East Coast to be closer to his family. He wound up being traded to the Indians, John's career was kind of winding down there. I don't think it was a result of, he was a left-hander, so he probably could have pitched till he was 40, right? If somebody would have given him an opportunity. But I think he had really grown incredibly tired of the travel and the baseball life, that's not as glamorous as a lot of people think it is, and being away from his family that much. And he's got this burgeoning business that he really wants to grow. John really worked hard at this. He did not. This wasn't like, oh, they're going to slap my name on this, and I just show up a couple days a year and sign some autographs, and that's it. He worked at selling tires. He got Eastman Kodak deal. It took him several years to get it. And at the time, Eastman Kodak was one of the biggest employers in the world. 60,000 employees here in Rochester alone. The factories are enormous. So they had their own fleet they had their own fire department. They had their, earth movers, you name it. So when he landed that contract, that was huge for Firestone. So I think that, there was it had run its course. He was tired of what he felt he wasn't being supported by the team. And the press had kind of turned on him. And he was struggling a little bit more on the mound too, but he's still a pretty effective pitcher, like at 59, I want to say, so. But it was just, I think it was a combination of things. I think he was done with San Francisco with the Giants, and I think they were done with him at that point. He just felt they didn't have his back and could have done a better job of defending him. You know, like, I mean, he had done so much for the organization, and I think he felt the loyalty was kind of unrequited at that point.
Dave Littman?
Yeah, thanks. That was a tremendous presentation. I learned a lot about Johnny Antonelli that I did not know. My question is probably pretty simple. What was his relationship with Leo Durocher? Because Leo could be tough to deal with.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because there's a great story that goes along with this. Again, when you know, Leo obviously was involved in that trade, he wanted a pitcher. They needed pitching. The Giants did 54, and he was willing to give up, as I said, Thompson, who had hit 26 homers and drove in more than 100 runs to get them, to get a quality pitcher. And they were really, you know, John had started showing things the year before that he was maybe starting to come into his own, and then he had the mononucleosis. But anyway, so Leo, you know, told him from the start, like, I'm going to give you the ball every four days, you know, right. and I, you know, John was very appreciative of that. This is the first time he had played for a manager and in an organization that believed in him, or was going to give him, you know, what he felt was a legitimate chance. And so he, you know, he obviously justified, you know, Leo's faith in him, and it, you know, with that 54 season. Now, what's interesting is the following year, John struggles a little bit. The team struggles, obviously. John's still, you know, he's still a quality pitcher and everything, but it's not the kind of year that he had 54. So there's a game, I want to say later in the season, maybe in September. I think he's pitching against, he's pitching against the Phillies in Philadelphia. He's up 3-1, but he's been really struggling. He's been in and out of trouble all day. And so Leo says, Schellenbach, the pitching coach, out. And John's just figuring, like, you know, the pitching coach is coming out. That means he sees something in my delivery, or there's something, or he's just going to slow me down, you know, at this point, and calm me down a little bit. Well, Schellenbach comes out and says, "Give me the ball." And John's going, "What are you talking about?" He goes, Leo wants you out of here. And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I'm ahead in this game." He goes, "I've been in and out. You know, I mean, I've worked myself out of trouble. Like, I can work myself out of trouble again." And so, you know, like, John's, you know, he is just furious with Leo at this point. So rather than give Frank the ball, John starts walking towards Elvin Dark at second base, the captain. And, you know, he's going to Elvin, "Can you believe this baloney?" Like, you know, who does he think he is taking me out of the game right now? Well, you know, like, and so Schellenbach's like following John out toward, you know, to get the ball, and he finally gives up and he goes back to the mountain, and he just has the umpire give him another ball. Meanwhile, John's going over, I forget who the third baseman was at the time, and he's like kind of pleading his case there. And then John looks over and he sees, like, new pitcher's already in, starting to warm up, so he knows how I'm out of the game now. So John storms off the field. And, you know, he makes a beeline, and there's Leo smoking a cigarette, which was common in those days in the dugout. And he's got this angry look on his face. You know, he's standing, like, right near the tunnel to go into the clubhouse. And Leo said, "Auntie," you know, again, that was the nickname. He goes, "Auntie, you made an ass of yourself out there." And, you know, John is like incensed, and he goes, "I get paid to win ball games." He goes, I can't win ball games if I'm in the clubhouse." And so, you know, now Leo's upset, and he goes, "Well, if that's the kind of attitude you're going to have," he goes, like, why don't you just go back to New York?" So John storms in, takes his shower, gets dressed, packs up his belongings, and I think it was called Connie Mack at the time, and not Shibe Park, but he's at Connie Mack. I guess it's like right near the train stop to go to New York. So John hops aboard the train. He's back at his apartment in Washington Heights before the game's even over, because he can turn the radio on inside. So the next morning, John's father-in-law shows up, and he's got one of the New York tabloids. and it's got a World War II type anti-suspended. And the headline is, his father-in-law shows him that, and they're like, so John's going like, oh my God, like, what do I do now? And because, nobody told him, nobody delivered the news that he had been suspended or this and that. So John doesn't know what to do. Team comes back from the road trip. And so a couple of days pass and John goes, well, this will be my turn to pitch. He goes to the polo grounds, right? And he knocks on the door and to the manager's office, to Leo's office there, and kind of like, pokes his head and he goes like, am I pitching? Is everything okay? He goes, yeah. He goes, you're pitching today. And they didn't say anything about suspension. There was no money. It was just like, both guys had calmed down in the heat of the moment. And they never had any issue again. I think Leo loved John's competitiveness, and John loved Leo's competitiveness. And John said Leo was the type of guy, he was a button pusher. There are certain guys he'd push the buttons on. He would never push the button on Willie Mays. He was a father figure to Willie Mays, and Willie could do no wrong. And John told the story like when Bill Rigney took over, and Bill Rigney, they're going through, the Giants are going through a tough stretch, and Bill Rigney has a team meeting afterwards, and he winds up criticizing Willie Mays for throwing to the wrong base. And Willie Mays went into a shell for like 2 weeks or whatever. Willie's a very sensitive guy. And Leo knew about it. Leo just knew how, Willie's my guy, and I'm going to stick with him. We all know the great story about Willie coming up and struggling early on, and Willie's in tears. He's 0 for 12 or whatever. And, Mr. DeRocher, you've got to, you need to send me back to Minneapolis or whatever. And Leo says, like, you're my center fielder. You're better than any center fielder in baseball. Defenseman, don't worry about it. You'll hit. You're my center fielder. Don't even think twice about it. And then, of course, Willie justified that faith. But he really respected Leo. And but he also knew Leo. There were other guys that hated Leo that wanted to strangle him. And Leo could get under your skin,
Thanks, Dave. Did anybody have a question who hasn't asked the question? Steve,
Yeah.
go ahead.
There's probably more people I wanted to strangle him than didn't.
Yes.
So Bobby Thompson, he got kind of screwed twice. When the Giants traded him to the Braves, the Giants go on and win a World Series. The Braves trade him back to the Giants. The Braves win a World Series. The question I have is, I think it's in your book, I just don't remember. 1958, a lot of us listened to the games on WINS. They were recreated by Les Kiter. And there was a game of the Giants were losing 11-1 in the 9th inning. 9 runs. The Giants scored 9 runs and the bases loaded with 2 out. It's 11-10. I'm pretty sure Antonelli was on the bench along with Don Torzik. They were the last 2. And Rigney brought Torzik in, and I guess he popped up. They lost 11-10. Is that in the book? I could swear I may have.
I don't think it's in the
Okay.
book. I don't think it's in the book, but again, like that one incident where John did pitch hit, hit a double, and then all of a sudden the Giants are batting around. And maybe it was that. I don't know. Maybe
Well, those of us that were fans at the time, and I remember why Torzik? Antonelli's a terrific hitter, and he hasn't pitched. He's sitting there. I don't know. Harvey, you remember this? Or Barry? You guys remember that game?
George, go ahead, George.
Yes, I do, Steve. And what I do also remember is it was a recreation, and Les Kiter had a vamp, so to speak. That inning, he was waiting for the plays to come in over the ticker, and it was Don Torzik popped up. I don't remember that Johnny was on the bench, but you're probably right.
Go ahead, George.
Okay. Vern, the Giants went in 11-1 down, and 3 doubles were given up by Vernon Law. King, Antonelli, pinch hitting for Burnside, and Bob Speak. Antonelli knocked in 2 runs and scored.
I was wrong. Okay.
The 6th run. They batted around. Bob Schmidt and Jablonski homered.
Right.
Then they loaded the bases on 2 walks and an error on a ball hit by Jim Mangan. Antonelli was coming up a second time, and they brought in Mo Resner's buddy, Don Tossig, who popped
That's right.
up,
Okay,
and Les Guido made it a great running catch in right center field by Mazeroski. Now,
That's right.
here's a twist. Mazeroski scored the 11th run for the Pirates in I think it was the top of the ninth of Burnside, and Antonelli batted for Burnside. And then he didn't come up a second time because they sent in Tossig.
Very good, George. Yeah, that's how Antonelli was. He
That was in May. That was May 5th, 1958. I heard Les Guido, Seal Stadium. The ball that Mazeroski caught could have been a regular pop fly, but he turned it into a great running catch.
George,
No.
George, you had your hand up, and then we're gonna wrap it up
Oh,
with.
yeah, no, I just wanted to say that was against the Pittsburgh Pirates.
right.
Yeah, which we established then after that.
Thanks. George Greger, did you have your own question?
Yeah, I have something else. There were 3 games against Pittsburgh. That was the third I was going to discuss. The first 2 occurred the prior year. He pitched and lost the opening day of 1957 and the last game of 1957.
Right.
And both times Pittsburgh scored 9 runs. Scott, that was very good. I have a question. Your last name suggests Ukrainian, is that right?
No, I mean, it suggests that I do have some Ukrainian blood. But it is Eastern European. There's a lot of, on my father's side there, from Poland to Slovakia and so forth. But yeah, there is some Ukrainian blood.
Now, Antonelli and I share the same birthday, April 12th, and you missed us by 2 days.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's the thing. Like John and I, like, you know, we're 2 Aries going to be able to do this book together, you know, whatever. But yeah, he's you know, I wish that you all could. I wish we could have done this in person. I wish you all could have met him, because just a prince of a guy, really, really was. And I miss him tremendously. I really do. And I you know, anything I can do to continue his legacy, I'm more than happy to do.
God, I'm getting the feeling that if you asked him, he would have hopped aboard tonight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. He definitely would have. You know, this whole Zoom thing. Of course, he passed just a little over 2 years ago, and you know, so it was just before all the COVID stuff started, really. You know, but he was. I just can't say enough good things about him, and doing the book, I've done 27, 28 books or whatever, and that was one of the most enjoyable. And some of it has to do with just I love that era of baseball. But he was just a pleasure. I mean, he's a great storyteller, and it was just essentially when you know, I was just doing word association with him. You mentioned names. You got any Sandy Koufax stories? You got any Stan Musial stories? You got a Hank Aaron story, Roberto Clemente story, or whatever, and you just let him go. I mean, you know, he just knew. He had a little bit of that Forrest Gump thing where he, you know, as far as baseball was concerned, you know, and great stories. Leo there were a lot of Hollywood stories too involving Leo, and there was one where Leo would have, you know, when the Giants were training out there in Phoenix, Leo would have a number of his Hollywood friends come there, and sometimes he put them in uniform. And Johnny said one time, I don't know if it was an exhibition game or if it was just like an inter-squad scrimmage, they were all in uniform. So all of a sudden there's a guy at first base, and he hears like, come on, Yanni, throw the ball over here, Yanni. He looks over, and it's Jerry Lewis. He's playing first base. You know? But that's how it was. Like, I mean, you know, all the stars came out with Leo's connections and stuff, you know.
I got Dan, you're gonna wrap it up. Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Gary. Scott, amazing presentation. You kind of remind me of John Miller in the way that if any topic comes up, you immediately have a story. And it's always, well, he said this, and then they said this, and he said that, and they said that. That's totally John Miller. So I guess it just comes from a lifetime of sports writing. 2 questions. I grew up in Phelps, New York, near Rochester. So I would go back to visit my relatives a lot, and I read a lot of your columns when you covered the Bills. And, you know, covering the Bills requires knowledge, but it also requires gallows humor, a lot of coping mechanisms. So if your book about Johnny Antonelli is anywhere near as entertaining as some of your columns were, it's going to be a damn good book.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. So the question, two questions for you. It was really impossible back then to grow up near Rochester and not know who Johnny Antonelli was. You didn't have to follow him as a player. You didn't even have to know about him, but just because he was basically like Mr. Rochester, kind of like Joe Altobello, you would just know of this person. I'm kind of curious, a lot of ball players, they kind of see the world and then they don't go back home again, but Johnny Antonelli did go back home again. So was it all just basically because of business and family, or were there just something about the whole area that really appealed to him? And the other question I have for you would be, how is Western New York coping with what happened to the Bills a couple of months ago against a team? And I won't mention anything more other than that.
You don't want to mention, you don't want to say 13 seconds because that's what it's become, 13. Yeah, I think John, he loved Rochester. He loved the way that Rochester supported him. Again, he was not a drinker, which was very unusual, obviously, in the 50s in baseball, where there was, so many guys were essentially functioning alcoholics, I hate to say. And the travel really wore him down and stuff. He wasn't a carouser. He often would, after pitching, like, he'd go back to the hotel and he couldn't sleep and he'd walk the streets of whatever town he was in. Sometimes like police would come by and like, hey, there's Johnny Antonelli. They'd drive him around in the cruiser and because he just couldn't get to sleep, But he just, obviously there was a large Italian-American population here in Rochester. And so I think, that appealed to him as well. His family was here. That was important. And again, he was trying to launch this business. And he was very, very serious about doing that and working hard at doing that. He also was a great golfer. And this is a great, great golfing community. It's a world-class golfing community with Oak Hill, all the majors we've hosted through the years and so forth. So I think all those things kind of combine there. As far as the Bills, yeah, you're never going to get over what just happened because it ranks on the misery index just below wide right probably, and the Music City Miracle and stuff like that. So because you were so close, and if they had won that game, I think there's no doubt that Josh Allen and the Bills were going to win the Super Bowl. But it's kind of the destiny here, or whatever, or the things that the burdens we bear. One, if I could give a quick it's a baseball Bills related story that involves Ralph Branca, since we were talking about Bobby Thompson and so forth. When Scott Norwood misses his field goal against the New York Football Giants, and the New York Football Giants win by 1 point, 20-19. Norwood, it's obviously a defining moment in his life and in Buffalo sports lore. So before the start of the next season, everybody thinks that's the last kick he ever, attempted for the Bills, but it wasn't. He was back next season. So before training camp that year, I decided I wanted to do a different off the beaten path type of column. And I'm going like we use the word goats, not greatest of all time in this case, but we're more of the goats' horns. And so I go, who could possibly relate to him? And I thought about, the goats, the infamous goats in history. And I thought about Ralph Branca. So I got a hold of Ralph Branca on the phone. And I said, Ralph, are you a football fan? He goes, yeah. He goes, I'm a huge Giants fan. Not baseball Giants, but football Giants, right? So, and I go, so you watched the Super Bowl last year? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, I go, so what did you think, when you saw that kick sail wide right, as the seconds were winding down? And he goes, I had two emotions. My first emotion, being a fan of the New York Giants, going back to days when he had friends on the team, was like, I jumped out of my chair and I was exulting, and I get like halfway up, and then I sunk in my chair, and I said, that poor bastard, was, that's what he said to me. And I had to clean it up for the family newspaper, obviously. And we started talking about relating to Scott Norwood. And of course, Ralph relating to the pitch, right? And having to bear that burden, because like, if anybody would know what Norwood is going through and is going to go through, for the rest of his life, essentially, it would be somebody like Ralph Branca. He was very, very insightful and thoughtful in talking about that. So it was just so there's that Bills baseball connection there that I wrote a column about. And one last, like you mentioned, Joe Altobelli obviously has a San Francisco Giants connection, being manager of the year for San Francisco 1 year, and he came back and settled in Rochester. And the other thing is, my daughter and son-in-law a couple of years ago purchased some land just south of Syracuse, not far from a place called Truxton, New York. And so I'm driving down, it's in the middle of nowhere.
Oh,
And Truxton, New York is a little dot on the map. And so I get to this fork in the road, essentially, and I stop and I look. And there is the statue of John McGraw.
wow.
And John McGraw was from Truxton, New York. And I had done a piece for Memories and Dreams magazine recently on Connie Mack and John McGraw. The whole issue is devoted to managers. And it was just really interesting for me to really research that and find out about his roots in Little Truxton. Of course, McGraw went to St. Bonaventure and was the baseball coach while he was a student there. But I just thought about that New York Giants connection there here in upstate New York. And there's a little town called McGraw. It's not far from Truxton, so I don't know if I couldn't find out. It must be something with his relatives. There must be some connection there where they settled. I know they were Irish immigrants. His father fought in the Civil War for the Union. But just thought I'd throw out that extra piece of New York Giants trivia.
You mentioned being a GOAT, and I think everyone here would probably remember this if you follow the Giants. In 2003, we had a right fielder, Jose Cruz Jr., and he's here for 1 year and probably played the best right field I've ever seen anyone play for one season. They got to the playoffs, a routine ball got hit to him in right field, dropped it. I mean, Charlie Brown could have caught it, and he dropped it. And I'll never forget what Mike Krukow said. Mike Krukow said, right after it happened, he said, sometimes in sports, a moment will come and it'll swallow you up so fast, you won't even know what happened. And that's pretty much what it had. It just you could just tell he was devastated. Just a career-defining moment in some ways.
Yeah, it was sad. Like I interviewed Bobby Thompson and Branca. They came up here, and they wound up signing, doing a lot of autograph signings together. And they were here in Rochester and stuff. I remember talking. But the thing about Ralph Branca talking about that was that he was a damn good pitcher, and he would have some more years afterwards and stuff. But this, sadly, that's what we focus on. Just the same way that people completely forgot about Scott Norwood had won 5 games in one season with field goals during the 1988 season for the Bills and stuff. But that stuff gets forgotten. So it's tough. I think we're unfair, very unfair at times, with people in sports. But you're right. Yeah, sometimes the moment gobbles you up, and then you go like, "Oh my goodness!" Like, this is how some people are going to define, these people the rest of the way.
Well, Scott, I heard that John McGraw got into bitter words with the mayor of Truxton, and taking a phrase from the Grateful Dead, the mayor told him to keep on Truxton.
End this thing.
Okay.
Scott, thank you so much for this evening. I mean, you went above and beyond, just fabulous.
Thank you so much,
Scott, very much.
Gail, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Gail Antonelli, give her a round of applause and her family.
Woo-hoo! Thank you, gentlemen. It was lovely to be with John's grandsons. These are his favorites, and I love being around them.
Thank you, Gail. Scott, don't be a stranger.
Anytime. I'd love to be back.
So one quick last thing. Jim Boeheim, does he need to get his glasses checked? I know you write. I know you write books about the orange, but
yeah. I mean, to say that wasn't intentional, it was, and I feel bad. I feel badly because Buddy Boeheim is a great kid. He really is. But that was a very bad thing to do.
He
And,
learned his lesson. He learned his lesson.
yeah, he learned his lesson. It's a painful one. And that, that was going to be the last, that's the last game of his college career.
The way it is.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Scott. Give it up for Scott.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody. We have no meeting next week. So we will reconvene in 2 weeks. I'll stay in here while close the door out.
Hey, that was terrific.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah,
good to
great.
see you.
Ooh, I like that.
By the way, did Les Kiter broadcast the last recreated game in 1961? Because